Ahoy there! ChrisFish here, and today I'm going to show you how to remove an old fish finder through-hole transducer like this one right here and install a brand new, modern, high-tech through-hole transducer that will let you do side-scan imaging, 3D imaging, and has new chirp sonar so we can get a great view under the water. Now real quick, here's how a transducer works. It mounts through the bottom of the boat and emits a chirp sonar, which is a range of ultrasonic sound waves. And those sound waves travel down through the water and then bounce off the bottom and return to the transducer. So the transducer is both emitting sound waves and it's listening for them, and then that signal is sent to the display and it's converted into the image that you could see on the screen. So by using this transducer, not only can you see how deep the water is, but you could see the bottom structure. So is it a flat sandy bottom, or are there rocks on the bottom, or is there even a shipwreck on the bottom? And this could be very helpful for finding structure that holds fish. In addition, if there's something in the water column, like a fish, the sound waves will bounce off that fish and the display will show the fish as a boomerang shape on the screen. That way you could see how deep the fish is and also how many fish there are. And finally, our new transducers have something called side scan sonar, which allows you to get high quality images on the side of your boat. Side scan uses that same ultrasonic sound wave as the regular sonar, but it angles it sideways. That way you could pick up more of a 3D profile of the bottom. This means side scan is great for seeing what the structure actually looks like, compared to regular sonar. And to give you an idea, we're coming up on the Galandris wreck, which is 190 feet deep, and we're using the regular chirp sonar. You can see the ship is the red mark that rises about 20 feet off the bottom. Now, if we drive along this wreck using the side scan feature, you can see the actual shape of the wreck and its shadow. So this technology is amazing. It's very useful for fishing and navigation, so let me show you how to properly install it. Alright, so first we need to remove this old transducer, and it's caulked on here with 5200 back when the boat was built in 2002. And I know 5200 is everybody's worst nightmare, but don't worry, there are products that dissolve it, but I don't even think we have to use this. I think we'll be able to knock this out without using it, but we do have this as backup. And for those of you who don't know, 3M 5200 is a really strong sealant. It's used in marine applications, and it's important because if this leaks, you'll have water getting into the boat. And we're going to be using 5200 when we reinstall the new transducer. Okay, so let's remove this old transducer from the boat, and to do that we need to climb up on the boat and remove the retaining nut on top of the transducer. And the transducer is located right down here in the engine bay, right there. So this is the top of the transducer, and in order to remove this large nut down here has to be removed. So first, let's pop out this pin, like that. Then we can remove this threaded cap, and now we can remove this plastic isolator. Good. And I'm just going to throw out this old transducer, so I'm going to cut the cable to make it simpler to remove. And finally, that gives us access to remove this giant nut. And just to give you an idea, this is a 32mm socket, so this nut is huge. It's not even close. Even an adjustable wrench doesn't even come close. You're going to need something really large. So to get the job done, I went and got a 2 3/8 inch socket. This thing is huge, and it goes right over and fits perfectly. So fit the socket on there, and let's break this loose. Okay, and that was a lot easier than I thought it would be. Now let's unscrew this nut all the way. And there we go, the nut is removed. So with the nut removed, now we need to take a hammer and we need to knock this through hole out of the hull. But before we slam this out and down through the hull, the first thing we want to do is make sure we remove that anti-rotation bolt. And the anti-rotation bolt is in front of the transducer, so we need to close the engine hatch. And then come up here to this hatch, and if we open this up, you can see the anti-rotation bolt down here. And this right here is the anti-rotation bolt. So let's remove it, and this is a smaller 15mm nut, so we could break it loose with a regular ratchet, and then remove it the rest of the way by hand. And don't forget about the washer as well. Now we can carefully tap the bolt out with a hammer, and after you can't hammer it anymore, get a punch, and use the punch to hammer it the rest of the way out. Good. So with the anti-rotation bolt removed, now the fairing is loose, so let's separate the fairing from around the transducer so we can remove the transducer. So I'm going to try to get the screwdriver in between the fairing and the transducer so we can try to pry this apart. Good. So that's exactly what we need to do. Little by little, let's break apart this fairing around the transducer so that all we have left is the transducer. Perfect. Now with all the plastic fairing removed, let's go up in the engine bay and remove all the plastic up here as well. Good. And now we want to hit the top of the transducer with a hammer, and as you hammer this, just be careful not to deform the metal too much because it needs to fit through the hole. So keep hammering it until it's loose, and you can see it's almost out. I'm moving it by hand, so just a couple more taps. Beautiful. Alright, and that is all there is to removing a through-hole transducer and fairing. We didn't even have to use the chemical to soften that 5200. We were able to work it out without using this, which is great. Alright, so now we need to fill and seal this hole where the old anti-rotation bolt used to be, since the new transducer won't be using this hole. And I have an entire dedicated video on how to properly do this, which I'll link in the description so you can easily find it. But for a quick overview, first you need to drill out the hole just a little bit so you have a fresh surface. Then you want to bevel the hole with an even bigger drill bit spinning in reverse. Then clean the hole out with a pipe cleaner to remove the dust. And finally clean the area with acetone. Now we'll put a piece of tape on the bottom. And then we could go up top and grab our thickened epoxy, and we're gonna inject this thickened epoxy into the hole until it's filled. And with it full, now all we need to do is wait a day for it to cure. Alright, a day later we could remove the tape and the epoxy is rock hard. Now we could sand this down using 200 grit sandpaper and just make it even with the rest of the hole, and we're good to go. So with that hole filled and smooth, let's make this main hole a little bit bigger to fit the new transducer. Now currently we have a 2-inch hole, and the new transducer needs a 2 3/8 inch hole. So to cut the new hole, we have a 2 3/8 inch hole saw to make the hole just slightly bigger. But the problem is the hole saw centers itself using this pilot bit, so as you drill this won't move around. But since we have a hole already, the pilot bit won't work. So I cut a piece of wood with a 2-inch hole saw, and it fits right into our hole nice and snug. And now the pilot bit has something to grab onto and keep that hole centered. So I'm gonna just use a little bit of tape to keep the wood in place since we have one shot at getting this right. I really don't want this moving around by accident. And you might be tempted to just get your drill and start drilling, but the problem is you could actually drill at an angle by accident. And we need this to be completely perpendicular to the hole's surface. So what we're gonna use is a drill guide. This is like almost like a portable drill press, and it's an amazing tool to keep us directly perpendicular with the hull. Another thing is when you're drilling, there's gonna be a lot of fiberglass dust. So a trick to keep the dust down is to cut a hole in a soda bottle or a juice bottle like this, and then you can connect your vacuum to the end of the bottle and basically create a dust-free or at least low dust environment as we're drilling. So now we're ready to drill. I have the vacuum going and I have a full face respirator on so no dust gets into my lungs or eyes. And when we start drilling our hole, we always start drilling in reverse. Anytime you cut into fiberglass, always drill into reverse so the saw doesn't grab and it doesn't damage the gel coat or the fiberglass surface. Good, and I always like to inspect before I completely drill this out, and you can see we have a perfect circle where it needs to be. So now we have the drill in forward, not reverse, and we're gonna drill this hole out. Start by going slow and keeping a lot of pressure as you drill, and just push on the drill and hold it steady. Perfect, and we cut all the way through the hole. And this plug worked exactly the way we wanted it to. Now, it's always nerve-wracking when you're cutting a hole into your boat, but check this out. Since we started in reverse, we didn't have any damage to the gel coat, and we had a nice, clean hole. Now, this might look good, but let's see if our transducer fits. And moment of truth, beautiful. Now that is what I'm talking about. This is a super tight fit, and anytime you're doing something like this, drilling a hole into your boat, you get nervous, but man, this worked perfect. Okay, so now we need to round the edge of the hole because the base of our transducer has a rounded edge, and that'll make it fit even more flat against the hull. So with an 80 grit sanding drum, sand around the entire hole at an angle, just like that, and we're good to go. Alright, so now we need to align this transducer so it's straight with the hull of the boat. So this needs to be straight down the center line of the boat. It can't be cocked to the side like that because you won't get an accurate reading. So we need this to be as straight as possible, and the easiest way to do that is to get a piece of tape and lay it straight down the keel of the boat, and then we could take our tape measure and measure the two ends of the transducer and make sure they're the same distance away from that center line. And with that even, let's tape the transducer down so it doesn't move. Alright, so that's how you properly align your transducer so we know it's parallel to the center line of the boat. We need this facing forward exactly parallel, especially since we're going to install another one on the other side of the hull. Both of them have to be parallel to get a good reading. So the center line's easy to find because that's just where the hull meets and creates that V. So that's that piece of tape. And then this length here, and then that length there. So from here to here, and here to here are exactly the same, and that's how you know it's parallel. So now what we need to do is we need to remove the anti-rotation bolt cover, grab either a marker or a flathead screwdriver, something to mark the hull so we know where to drill, and then we can remove the transducer and drill the hole for the anti-rotation bolt. And you can see that mark right there that we made, that's where we need to drill. So now we need to find the correct size drill bit for the anti-rotation bolt, and in order to do that, you could check the instructions, it says it right in the instructions, or you could go and look and see, line these two up, and you could see that they are exactly the same size. So this is the drill bit that I'm gonna be using to drill our anti-rotation bolt. Again, we're using that drill guide. That way we know we're making a perfectly perpendicular hole, and we always start drilling in reverse. That way we don't damage the gel coat. Once you drill into the hole a little bit in reverse, now we can put it in forward and drill all the way through the fiberglass. Okay, with that drilled all the way through, let's quickly install the transducer and test fit the bolt. And this is very tight, which is exactly what we want. So the hardest part is done. The holes are drilled. All right, and that is all there is to it. Both of our holes are drilled and we are ready to install our transducer. All we have to do is sand this down so that our transducer bonds right to the gel coat. And we're gonna be using a 5200 fast cure. Cures in 24 hours so we can get the boat in relatively quickly. But since when you open this up, it pretty much goes bad after 24 hours, I'm gonna get the other through hole done before I start and install them both at the same time. And on our other side, we have to drill a hole that's basically mirror image to that hole right there, but it can't be approximate. It has to be pretty accurate so we get good accurate 3D imaging and good accurate side scan. If it's too far up or too far back, it's gonna distort it. So we could either take measurements from under here or take measurements from inside the engine bay. I think it'll be easier to take measurements from inside the engine bay, so that's what I'm gonna do. But let's just say you don't have a hole ready. Let's just say you didn't have a transducer. You're putting a fresh through-hole transducer in your boat. Well, I have 3 quick tips for you. First tip, you want to make sure that your through hole is as close to the center line as possible because that's going to help with keeping it in the water as you're underway. If it's all the way off to the side here, it could come out of the water when the boat bounces on a wave. And then you lose a signal and you won't get the depth, you won't see any fish. So as close to the center line as possible. This is a good distance, you saw that. That's actually set up real nice. The second tip, you want the through hole to be as far back towards the stern of the boat as possible because the stern of the boat doesn't pop out of the water. The bow of the boat does when you're driving over waves, but the stern pretty much stays in the water, again, keeping that signal going. And then finally, the third tip is look for other through holes. You don't want to have your through hole transducer anywhere near other through holes because this creates turbulence in the water. So if your through hole transducer was right here somewhere, this turbulence would cause you to lose signal while you're underway. So we have it all the way off to the side, away, no other through holes in the area. So that is perfect. Now let's go inside the boat and get that pilot hole drilled so we could drill this out. Now with everything out of the way, we're gonna start on this side where our hole already is. We know we need to match this exactly to the other side, so it's a mirror image. So we could take some measurements to see where this hole is relative to this area, which again is a mirror image on the other side. But what I've found is even easier is get a piece of cardboard and we're gonna line this cardboard up. It goes all the way across and you can see it goes all the way to this little lip right here and it fits in. Now I'm gonna go under the boat and poke a hole through the middle where the pilot hole goes. And then if we check, you can see I poked a hole exactly right there. And this is where we're gonna put it on the other side. So let's go transplant this to the other side. You can see I have it lined up on that ledge there. That's the same as the other side. It's against both sides here. So that is exactly where we need to drill our pilot hole. Nice and simple templates like this make the job really easy. So now we just need to drill a hole straight through the hull using our template as a guide. Good. Now under the boat we have our hole, which is going to help center the hole saw. And just like before, we want to start in reverse. That way we don't damage the gel coat. And then we can put the drill in forward and start drilling away. Alright, so that's the hole for the transducer. Now we need to round out the edge of the hole with the sanding drum. And I have a vacuum right there to catch all the dust. And finally, let's test fit the second transducer. And this fits nice and tight as well. Next, let's make sure this is running straight down the boat, and it is. So we could grab a drill bit and mark exactly where we need to drill our anti-rotation bolt hole. Now let's remove the transducer, and you can see our mark right there. So let's drill that exact mark in reverse, and then switch over to forward and completely drill out that hole. Beautiful. Now we need to do one last test fit and get that transducer in. And let's get that bolt in as well. Perfect. And beautiful, we have both of our transducer holes drilled out with the anti-rotation bolts. We are good to go down here. Now let's go topside. So it's very important when we have holes that are going through the hull, you want to use some type of backing plate. This is called G10 fiberglass board. It's a super high density resin and fiberglass sandwich. Really high density. This is pretty heavy stuff. And this is gonna act like a washer, a backing plate. It's gonna distribute the load where our new holes are. So I need to cut this and drill some holes. Just like that. And these are perfect size backing plates. Let me show you how they'll fit. So this is gonna fit in just like that. We just need to make sure it's lined up. And this needs to be epoxied to the hull. So what we need to do is grab some acetone and a metal wire brush, and we need to clean this surface as good as we can so the epoxy can stick. Acetone is really strong and works great to remove dirt and oils from the fiberglass, yet it's not strong enough to damage the fiberglass. So clean the whole area up and vacuum out the dust, and then we want to sand the area with 100 grit sandpaper so the surface is rough and the epoxy has something to grab onto. And finally, we want to wipe everything down with the acetone one last time. Now for the backing plate, we want to sand this down with 100 grit as well, and you can see all those scratches will give the epoxy something to grab onto. And then the last thing to do is wipe down this surface with some acetone. Beautiful, so both areas are cleaned up, they're sanded down, they're cleaned with acetone. Our backing plates are sanded and they are cleaned as well. Now we're gonna grab some thickened epoxy, mix it up, and then we're gonna coat the back of this plate and then put it down in place and let it cure for 24 hours. Now, anytime you mix epoxy, you want to do so on a non-porous surface, like this piece of cardboard I put in a plastic bag. If you mix this on a porous surface, just like straight cardboard, the hardener could get absorbed into the cardboard and then there won't be enough to fully cure the epoxy, and that wouldn't be good. Now, when mixing epoxy, you want to try your best not to introduce air bubbles. So you want to mix this just like you would body filler for a car. You mix by scooping the epoxy and then squeegeeing it out. Scooping it and then squeegeeing it out. So you want to mix this up for about a minute until the mixture is all one solid color, which means the hardener is mixed thoroughly with the epoxy. Now we could add the epoxy to the backing plate, and you want to add it a little bit thicker than normal on here because the fiberglass bilge isn't exactly flat. There's a lot of little lumps, so we need to fill those crevices and divots. And now we could place that backing plate down in the bilge, making sure we align the hole in the boat with the hole in the backing plate. And once those are aligned, we could press down and push the air out and make sure the epoxy has good contact with the bilge, and then tape off the backing plate so it doesn't move as it cures. Now going under the boat real quick, we just want to inspect our backing plate from this angle and make sure it isn't hanging over into our hole. It's completely flush with our hole. And look at that, that is completely flush. That's perfect. We don't have that backing plate hanging over, which is gonna block the hole at all, because if that's the case, then when we put our through hole transducer in there, it's gonna be blocked. This is a really tight hole for our transducer, which is what we want. So we can't have that backing plate get in the way. It has to be completely flush with our hole, and it is. Look at that, that is perfect. So now let's get the other backing plate in as well, making sure it's centered, and then press down to squeeze the air out and make sure all the epoxy is contacting the bilge. And finally, we could tape it up so it doesn't move. All right, so with both our backing plates epoxied in place, they're taped down so they won't budge, they're aligned perfectly, everything looks good. Now we have to wait 6 hours for the epoxy to dry, and then we can install our through-hole transducers. Now, as we wait, I wanna show you how to test out those through-hole transducers, because after we install these transducers, we don't wanna remove them. And if either of them are bad, we wanna know before we actually install it. So let me show you how to test them out. All right, so here's the setup I have in my backyard, nothing fancy. It's super, super, super important to test out your transducers before you install them in the boat. Test them out, because if you drill a hole and then you use the sealant and you put them in place, you run the wires, and one of these doesn't work, you're gonna hate yourself for not testing it out, because then the boat has to come out of the water. You have to try to get these out without damaging them. It's just not easy to do, so test them out, trust me. And it's easy, look at this. We have a simple garbage pail filled with water, and then both of these wires are running up to the Y adapter right here, and it goes to the back of our unit here. This is an Axiom Pro. So then let me show you, let's flip around here. The back here, it's easy enough. It tells you exactly where each connector goes, and you can check the connection and see if it fits. This is for our transducers. They plug right into here. And then this right here is the power wire. That's all you need. You need to connect the transducer and connect the power wire, and that's all you need to do for this test. Oh man, this is exciting. This is gonna be the first time I power my unit on. I'm super pumped. All right, powering on for the first time ever. So now we go to our fish finder. You can see we have our temperature, so that's good. It's letting us know the temperature. It's not giving us a depth, probably because it's in a little garbage pail. So you can see the depth isn't really coming in. Then it says it's 20 feet, and obviously it's not 20 feet. And I figured out why. I had to think about this for a second. I made a mistake here. These are 20-degree transducers. So it's for a hull that has a 20-degree angle. So these right now are for a hull, or set up for a hull that has no angle, and that's not what these are made for. So these need to be angled like that. So in order to do that, what I did was I got another piece of wood and I cut angled holes All right, so the new transducers are in, and you can see they are at an angle now, which is important. All right, and check this out. Although we're not getting a number for our depth, normally it'll say like 5 feet or 10 feet, or in this case, it's like 1 foot or 1.5 feet. We do have a nice solid line here. So the red is the bottom, and the blue here is the water column. And look, here's our scale, 0 feet, 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, right at about 1.5 feet, which is about the depth of our garbage pail. We have a nice solid line. So that means it's working, and we have a good temperature. Now to be thorough, let's go check out our side scan, because that'll let us look at both individual sensors. And check it out, we have both individual ones coming up, and then we can actually go in here and click the port one, and then click the starboard one, and both of them work. Beautiful. All right, so now we know our transducers are working perfectly. Let's go under the boat and prep the bottom so we could install the transducers. Now, the same way our old transducer was sealed up against the gel coat, we want to do that with our new transducer, because 5200 marine adhesive sealant works best against straight gel coat. If we were gonna adhere against this paint's ablative, it's supposed to come off, and that means we could get leaks. So we're gonna sand away this paint and get down to bare gel coat. So let's start by getting the transducer in place and get that anti-rotation bolt in as well, so it's all set up exactly how it's supposed to be installed. Now we could trace the shape onto the hull using a marker. That way we know the exact footprint of the transducer. Next, we want to sand away all the bottom paint with 100 grit or 200 grit sandpaper. And anytime you're working with bottom paint, be sure to wear a full face respirator, because boat paint is highly toxic. So sand away all the paint until there's bare gel coat, and then we could clean the gel coat so we could get all the dust off the surface. And finally, let's mark around the transducer one more time just to make sure we have all the bare gel coat where it needs to be. And it looks like we do. So now a little trick to make cleanup really easy: mask off the surrounding paint with tape. That way, if any 5200 sealant gets on the boat, which it definitely will, we could easily pull the tape off and the surface will be nice and clean. All right, so with the gel coat completely clean with acetone, our holes are cleaned out, we have the tape line all the way around, which is gonna help us a lot to make sure that 5200 doesn't get all over the place. It'll make it really easy to clean up. With this all set up, I also did the exact same thing on the port side of the hull. And so with these done, let's go into the engine bay and check out our backing plates. So this came out perfect. It is solid in there. We have epoxy leaking out of all the ends here, so we know it's completely sealed. And this is a nice thick backing plate. We're gonna have no stress at all on this piece when we tighten it down. That's exactly what you want. This big backing plate will distribute the load of that nut and also the new transducer. And we have a new hole in here, so we want some strength in there. So that does all of that, which is why you always use a backing plate whenever you do a through hole. And with our backing plates prepped and the 2 holes for the anti-rotation bolts prepped, we are ready to go. We're ready to install our transducers. Let me show you that process. So with everything all laid out and ready to go, we're gonna install our 2 transducers, and we're using 3M Marine Adhesive Sealant 5200. This is the fast cure version. This means it cures in 24 hours versus, I think it's like a week for their regular 5200. And we're gonna be using the 5200 under the boat, so on the bottom here. And then we're gonna be using the 4200 in the engine bay on the top where the threads go and where the washer goes and the nut tightens down. Think of 5200 as red thread locker. It's permanent. It actually says it right here, permanent. And think of this as like that blue medium strength thread locker. It still holds it in place, but it is removable. And you can see right there, it's in between permanent and removable. So that's how I like to think of these two: red thread locker, blue thread locker. And that's how we're gonna set everything up. I'll show you that right now. So let's start out with the starboard side and let's get this installed. Man, oh man, I am excited. Since we're starting out on the starboard side, make sure you pick the starboard transducer. Do not mix them up. They'll both fit in. Make sure you have the one labeled starboard. Then you wanna make sure you remove the stickers. And then, very important, make sure you use acetone. Do not use isopropyl alcohol. It is not compatible with 5200. You need to use acetone. That's what we've been using this whole time. If you use isopropyl alcohol, the 5200 won't stick and you'll have big problems. Okay, so clean the sticker residue off with the acetone. And now we're gonna tape off the transducer anywhere we don't wanna get 5200, because that stuff will get everywhere. I know a lot of you guys work on cars, so think of it as like the silver anise of the boat world. So with the entire bottom and side of the transducer taped up, I left a hole for the anti-rotation bolt. This looks awesome, and what this is gonna do is when we have adhesive on here, it's gonna goop over the side. It's gonna spill over, especially when we compress it against the hull. And it's gonna make a mess. 5200 is not easy to clean up. You have to clean it up with acetone. It's gonna be all over your gloves. The best way I could think is to cover it right now with tape, so then all you have to do when you're done is peel it off. Also, having tape on the bottom is gonna help because guess what? You're gonna have 5200 on your hands and you're gonna be afraid to touch the bottom, but now you don't have to worry about it because it's just gonna come off with the tape. So this is gonna be super helpful. So I did the starboard side and I also did the port side transducer. So we are ready to go. Everything's all set. So let's get the 5200 and add it to our transducers. Actually, real quick, before we go touch the 5200, we have gloves on right now, but it helps if you add a second layer of gloves. So if you need to, you could shed one layer and still have a layer underneath. This is actually a really cool trick when I know I'm gonna get my hands dirty, but I know I'm gonna need some clean hands eventually. So putting 2 pairs of gloves on solves that problem. And it is 5200 time. It's in the caulking gun, ready to go. The first thing we're gonna do is not the transducer, but we're gonna caulk the holes. So just get a little 5200 in the hole, you don't need a lot, and then use your finger to spread it out. You only need a thin coat. This hole is pure fiberglass, it has no wood, it's not cord, but it's still a good idea just to get a thin layer on here so you seal out any water. Now we could add our 5200 to the transducer, and you're gonna just put a bead around the stem of the transducer and a bead around the anti-rotation bolt hole, and then add some along the front and down the sides. That way we can make a complete seal. And honestly, this is probably too much 5200, but don't worry, when we tighten down the transducer, it's gonna squish all this extra 5200 out between the hole and the transducer, so I'm not really concerned. Finally, with that done, we could mount the transducer onto the boat, and once it's in place, push as hard as you can against the hull to squish out any excess 5200. And don't worry, even more is gonna get pushed out once we tighten the nut down. Now let's get the anti-rotation bolt in and add a small amount of 5200 right at the base of the bolt, and this will prevent any water from getting in through this hole. And then we could push this in the rest of the way. Now we need to get up on the boat and we don't wanna make a mess, so let's shed the outside layer of gloves so we have nice, clean gloves on. Good. Now inside the boat, we're gonna be using 4200, which is a lot easier to remove. So we want to add a bead around the stem of the transducer, and then add the included rubber washer, and then put another bead on top of the washer. And I'll be honest with you guys, leaning over into the deep bilge makes it tough to add the 4200 in a nice, clean way. It definitely looks a little sloppy, but even though it looks sloppy, this is going to function perfectly fine. Now we could slide the nut down the wire and tighten the nut down. And unfortunately, I noticed now there is a lot of sealant on the threads, which is making this really hard to turn by hand. So let's get a socket on here and then use the socket and a screwdriver as leverage. And you want to tighten this nut down so it compresses the gasket just a little bit, and you'll see that 4200 start to squeeze out from under the gasket. You don't have to over tighten this, just make it snug, just like that. And finally, clean up any mess you made with a towel and acetone right away before it cures. Good. Now let's finish up by tightening down the anti-rotation bolt back here. So add a little 4200 at the base. And I cut an angled washer out of that G10 board since the bolt is at an angle compared to the flat bilge in this part of the boat. And next we could add the included bronze washer. And finally we could tighten down the nut and then snug it up the rest of the way with a wrench. Again, don't over tighten this, just get it pretty snug. That way you don't have any play and it's secure. All right, so our through hole transducer on the starboard side is successfully in place. That is not gonna leak. We have done that perfectly. And I do wanna mention, I made my own socket. Well, I bought a socket and I customized it. So I cut out the top part here. This is where the ratchet would go. And I drilled some holes. So I made a big hole here. So if I needed to fit the screwdriver in, I could. And I drilled some cross holes so I could fit the screwdriver through here and here. And you saw me turn it. It worked out perfect. That made this job really easy. Without this, I don't think I could have tightened that nut because that sealant really clogs up those threads. So that's in, our anti-rotation bolts in. Let's go underneath and remove the tape. And check it out. You can see when we tighten down that nut, all this sealant seeped out, which is exactly what we want. So there's minimal sealant between the hull and the transducer. It all pushed out, but it's completely sealed. There's no air in there. So we're not gonna get any water intrusion at all. So I'm gonna run my finger along the edge of the transducer to smooth out the 5200, almost like if you're cleaning up something that you just caulked. And now we can peel away all the tape from around the transducer and peel away the tape on the actual transducer, and look at how clean this kept everything. Using tape worked perfectly for keeping things clean. And then finally we could add the cap to the anti-rotation bolt and then wipe down the area with a towel to remove any 5200 before it cures. Ooh, baby, check that out. That came out perfect. So that is all done. Now let's go to the other side and do that transducer. So this is the same exact process. Clean the transducer off with some acetone. Then we could add our 5200, and this time I'm gonna spread it out a little bit with my finger, and that should make it easier to compress against the hull. Remember to add a skim coat of 5200 to both holes in the hull, and then we could push our transducer up into the hull using a good amount of force, but don't worry, when we tighten it, the excess 5200 is gonna squeeze out, leaving just a thin layer. Then we'll add a little 5200 on the base of the anti-rotation bolt, and then we could push that up into the hull as well. Now inside the boat, I'm taking the extra time to clean the threads with acetone so there's no sealant on them, which made it hard to hand tighten the nut on the other transducer. With these threads clean, let's add a bead of 4200 around the base, and then add our washer, and then add our second bead of 4200, and finally we could slide the nut down the wire and hand tighten it. And check it out, this is way easier to hand tighten with those threads clean, so definitely keep those threads free and clear of sealant. Now we could slide the socket over the nut and snug this up. Good. And the last thing to do is add some 4200 around the anti-rotation bolt, then add the angled washer I made, and then add the washer that came with the kit, and tighten down the nut by hand, and snug it up with a wrench, just like that. Alright, so with both of our transducers tightened down, that's perfect, that's exactly what you want. We have both of our anti-rotation bolts tightened down as well. Let's go under the boat and clean up that transducer. Back under the boat, we can remove all the tape, and this is just so satisfying because of how clean everything is under the tape. I love it. And then we could clean up any mess we might have made with some acetone on a rag, and finally, we can remove our dirty gloves. All right, and check that out. That came out beautiful. Holy smokes. Can't believe we are done. It looks so good. We're not gonna have any problems with any leaks at all. So that has to cure for 24 hours before we can put the boat in the water. I'm gonna wait 2 days, plus the marina has to touch up the paint, so they're gonna take care of that, and then the next day we'll get it in the water. But right now, as this is wet, you wanna clean off any 5200 that you get on your tools, on your phone, on whatever you have, on your hands, wherever that 5200 got, you wanna clean it off. It comes right off with acetone, nice and easy. If you let it dry, it's probably not gonna come off so easily. So clean stuff up now. So just to give you an idea, here's my screwdriver covered in 5200, and look at how clean we got it with just a couple of wipes with the acetone. So definitely clean your tools right away before the sealant cures. Okay, with everything cleaned, look at this. This looks so good. I can't wait to get this boat in the water. And unfortunately, I have to wait 2 days, but due to the magic of editing, you guys only have to wait a couple of seconds. So we'll get the boat in the water, we'll check for leaks, we'll connect it to the fish finder, and we'll test her out. All right, now a couple days later, the moment we've all been waiting for, the boat's going back in the water. And if we take a look under here, you can see it's all painted and good to go. So let's get the boat in the water. And if you guys own a boat, you know this is like the best feeling ever, getting your boat back in the water after a long winter season. I'd say it's equivalent to like getting your car running after you've been working on it for a while and going out for a ride. All right, so we're in the water, and the marina said I could stay at their dock to check for leaks. And if we take a look down here, the bilge is completely dry. There's not one drop of water down here. So we're gonna wait a little bit longer and check again, but in the meantime, let's run the transducer cables to the fish finder display, and then we'll go offshore and check out a shipwreck using the new transducers. Okay, first let's install the display. And if you want a full in-depth video on how to install this fish finder GPS radar display, I'll have an entire YouTube video on how to do this, but for now, here's a real quick overview. So let's get this display installed. Then you want to take the wires from the transducers and run them up under the deck all the way along here to the console, right here. And then we could run it right up the side to the display. Now at the display, we have the power wire, which we need to connect. And then we need to connect the transducer wire, which we converted from 2 wires to 1 wire using a 2-to-1 connector. And now finally, we could power it up. And it is working, so let's head offshore and check out a shipwreck. Okay, so we're heading out cruising 22 knots, and you can see the fish finder has no problem picking up the bottom in detail, even at speed. You can clearly see the deep drop off right here coming into the channel, and let me find some fish and show you guys what that looks like. Okay, so check this out. You can see that there's a giant bait ball, and this is actually a school of bunker, and they're all balled up because right under them, that boomerang right there is a striped bass. And I'm really impressed that these transducers could see through this school of fish. And you can see coming onto the screen right now are some more striped bass, and their signal's a lot stronger because they're not underneath a ball of bait. All right, so we are way offshore here, 20 miles or so out. and we are testing out in 200 feet of water our transducers, and we're about to go right over a wreck. This is called the Greek wreck, and we have the side scan going, and hopefully we'll be able to get a good scan of this wreck. So as we drive over the wreck, the transducers are scanning the bottom, and you can literally see the wreck. And remember, this is 200 feet deep, so this is really impressive. Just to give you an idea, this is the boat that sunk here in 1942, and you could actually see the resemblance, which is really cool. And then now you can see with our regular sonar, we have the regular bottom, and then we have the wreck, and then fish right above the wreck. Look at all those fish there. How cool is that? This is working beautifully, and man, oh man, what awesome technology. I mean, if you're just gonna look, like there's nothing here. We're in the middle of the ocean, and like how are you supposed to know there's anything down there? And now if you go check this out, you know there's a wreck. You can see with the GPS, you can see with the depth sounder. That's just awesome technology. So there you go, that's how you install a through-hole transducer. We just checked, it works flawlessly. That's everything you need to know. And hopefully the video was helpful. If it was, remember to give the video a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button for more DIY boat videos and fishing videos, all that good stuff right here. And as always, all the tools, all the products, everything I used, including the through-hole transducer, the unit here, everything is linked in the description so you guys can easily find it.